Hey, everybody. This episode is about change. It's kind of a down and dirty playbook on how to think about change management for your company, whether you are changing from a people perspective, a process, a technology, or some other type of change. Having a plan and looking at your approach is critical to helping the change land and stick. And so in this episode, I talk about where companies currently are in change, which is that top-down approach to change, versus a newer approach, which kind of opens it up to the employees, called open source change. So I hope you enjoy and you learn something. Let's get into it. I want to give kind of a down and dirty crash course on change management. My firm does change management. We help companies move through change, whether that's a people change, a process change, a technology change, or some other kind of change. We really care about the integrity of moving people through change in a way that helps them feel safe and comfortable and grounded so that the change lands and sticks. But most companies right now, in fact, 80% of companies still use the old approach of top-down change, meaning leaders up at the top decide we're going to change XYZ and we're going to push the change down and everybody's going to have to get on board, or you can leave. I think we've seen some very profound examples of top-down change in the American government recently and how ineffective that can be. The thing about pushing change from the top down is that a very small body of people, or maybe even just one person, is making the decision to change. And you know what? It might be a great decision to change. You might be integrating new technology that the company desperately needs, or you might be acquiring a new brand that the company desperately needs, or you might just be shifting some things around in your structure or in your hierarchy that the company needs and will ultimately help the company run better. But when you ram change through and you don't give people a chance to consider it, talk about it, express themselves, and learn how to absorb the change, you're going to get resistance. That top-down change is old school. It doesn't work nearly as well as we want it to. And, we hosted a live virtual leadership conversation a couple of weeks ago. And there were about, 11 or 12 leaders in this conversation. And I asked the question, if so many people resist the top-down change, why are 80% of the companies still relying on that approach? And one person said, because we feel pressure to just get it done. And so when we make the mandate from the top, we can just get it done without any speed bumps and just move through and move on to the next thing. And I know that can intellectually make sense to a degree. But when you aren't allowing people, especially people who are absorbing the change, who the change is impacting the most, if you're not allowing them to speak and be a part of the experience, to get them on board, you will be creating a pressure cooker of resistance and resentment that will have its effects later on. You might not see the effects right away, but there will be effects later on. So when you expect people to just get on board, resistance builds. And people have really interesting ways of resisting. Now, change itself can be very difficult for some people. Some of us are just born, it's actually a personality trait. And so some of us are just born with a higher level of tolerance to change. We just kind of embrace change. We are interested in wanting to see things evolve. We're not as concerned about what we might lose in the experience of the change. It's just partially personality. And then some people, you have to kind of tear their white-knuckled fingers away from the thing that they are gripping in order to get them to change. And there's all levels of differences on that spectrum, right? And people have their personalities, and they also have past experiences that maybe they had the rug pulled out from under them at some point, and now that experience informs how they react to change moving forward. But no matter what, people respond to change with kind of a trauma response, that resistance response. And I'm sure you've heard of at least 3 of these: the fight, the flight, and the freeze. But there's also a newer one called Fawn. So if you are a leader, or if you are someone who is going through change right now, maybe if you listen to these responses, you can identify yourself within one of these responses so that you can become more aware of your own flavor of resistance to change. Or you might be able to recognize this in your teams and your people if you are a leader who is trying to push change through right now. So the first one is fight. and it's just like it sounds. Fighting is outright resistance, blaming, projecting, maybe even bad mouthing the change. So long time ago, I coached a leader who ran a 250 person engineering group. And this person really, they had been in this role for well over a decade, and the company was acquired by a bigger organization. And when you're acquired by a bigger organization, their policies, their procedures, their values, all of that trickles down. Those are really big changes, especially to someone who has been with an organization for a really long time. And so this person, from a values and philosophical perspective, did not like a lot of the new HR processes and policies. And they were very outspoken about their dissent. And, all of it actually made sense. There were things that were logical. They made sense from a business perspective and from an individual perspective. But that person was fighting the change and then setting the example for their team, which can create a lot of problems when you have an entire team or an entire function questioning the change that's happening. So that's fighting, is just outright like, I'm not doing this, and here's why. And by the way, when you work with really smart people, they can make their fight look really smart. They'll say things like, well, these changes don't align with my values. These changes totally go against what we say we are as a company. Or we're not going to do this because we already have an efficient way of working, and that works just fine. Those are all very smart ways to fight, but it's still a fight. Then there's flight, where people just kind of disappear. They could actually physically disappear. You might not see them on calls as much. They aren't in meetings. They don't show up to the new trainings or the Q&A sessions about the change. They just aren't showing up. They don't respond to things. They don't ask questions. They're not engaging. They're just kind of a ghost. They're under the radar. They're quickly and quietly disengaging, and they might just self-select and resign. That is another way to fly, is by just quitting. The third one is freeze, meaning they're just kind of stuck in their ways. They don't know what to do, so they're not doing anything. They don't know if they should do it the new way. They don't know if they should do it their old way. They don't know how to bring those two ways together, and they don't know how to ask questions. And freeze can be really damaging because it creates a stall. So suddenly you've got somebody who was a very efficient and effective, productive employee now has frozen because they're not sure which way to turn because of this change. They're just frozen in place. And the last one is Fawn. Fawn is kind of a newer one that's been developed. And you can think about that as people pleasing. So someone says something like, this is amazing. I can't wait. I'm so excited about this change. This new leader is going to be great. I can't wait for this new technology. But they're not actually excited about it. They're more scared. They're more skeptical. They're more cynical. But on the outside, they're saying they're excited, but their actions are showing something different. They will disengage. They might badmouth it behind the scenes, or they might just ignore it altogether and just keep doing things the way they want while saying they're on board. So recognizing these resistance responses is really important if you are ushering change into your team, your function, or your whole company. Addressing the resistance head on is really important and necessary, and often doesn't happen in that top-down change model. Because in the top-down change model, you're just trying to push it through. You're telling them, here are all the great things that are going to happen. Here's how we're going to get better and smarter and faster. And don't you want this change? It's going to be amazing. But you're not actually stopping to listen and to see what's going on with the individuals as they're being pulled through the change. Companies often miss things when they're ushering change through. They just don't consider how much the individuals are impacted by even the smallest changes. For some people, changing a shared document within their team is a disruption. Learning new ways of working is something companies often forget about, that it takes time as an individual and a team to start to gel and develop rituals and habits together. And they also miss that communication is the most critical, crucial part of enabling change for your organization. And that is often the part that companies take the least amount of time with, because it's just that it takes time. And as I said at the beginning, when we had our virtual leader discussion, and this woman said, we just need to get it done. Get it done doesn't include a strategic, thoughtful communication plan. And speaking of plans, all change needs a plan. You have to have some structure of a plan for how you will introduce a change. You have a new leader coming in, you have to come up with a plan for how you're going to introduce that to your people. There is an organization called ProSci, which I will include in the show notes. I am certified in that framework of change. They have a kind of the gold standard of change, although change is evolving, but they've got a pretty good lock on how to usher change through organizations. They have a lot of research that says that change is 7 times more likely to be successful if there's a plan in place. And yet, when you ask companies or leaders within companies, so what's your plan for the change? Their response can be, well, we don't have like a grand plan, but we have some communications and we're going to have some focus groups and we'll have an ask me anything session with the new leader. And all of that is great, but it's not an orchestrated plan that brings people step by step through from beginning to middle to end. So there is an alternate approach to change management that is not the top-down approach, but is a people's approach. It is something called open source change. An open source change borrows from open source software development, which is software that anyone can contribute to evolve and make better. A great example of open source, the open source model, is Wikipedia. Anyone can contribute to Wikipedia. Now, there is a governing body of folks that are there to ensure the quality of the information and the integrity of the content. So it's not just a total free-for-all, but everyone has the opportunity to contribute and make it better. Voices are heard. Open source change is an approach where voices are heard. Now, open source is not the perfect approach to change. There is no perfect approach to change. It will always have resistance. It will always have moments of clunkiness. It will always feel like at one point you're stepping 2 steps back and 1 step forward and 5 steps back. That's what it's like to move large groups of people through change. If you do an open source approach, it still requires orchestration. It still requires a plan. It still requires communication, and it requires dedicated people to help guide everyone through the process. So I'm going to give you the 3 pillars of open source change. The first is co-creating the change strategy, meaning you are gathering information from all sources about how to strategize this change. You are hosting focus groups. You're having one-on-one conversations. You're hosting leadership calls. You are gathering information to hear how best we can implement this change so that it works for everyone who is affected by it. And it requires transparency. And one of the pieces of transparency is setting clear expectations that even though we are gathering information from all sources, that does not mean we are going to implement everybody's desires and requests into the final change experience. We will take it all into account and create a plan that addresses as much as we can to make sure that this is successfully implemented. So you have to be transparent about expectations. Hey, Joe, we're going to listen to you, but we cannot promise that your opinion will make it into the final plan. But we are going to hear you and do our best to make sure that we answer as many requests as we can that make sense within the time frame and the budget that we have. That is the transparency that needs to happen when you are gathering large swaths of input. The second pillar is shifting the implementation to the employees, meaning one person is not sitting at the top saying, this is the process we're going to implement this change with. We have this new technology. We're going to do this on day 1. We're going to do this on day 20. We're going to do this on day 30. This doesn't really work because change affects different functions, different job functions a little differently. And everybody will absorb the change in a way that works for them and their job roles. So how change affects a marketing team will be different than how change affects your finance team or your HR team or your product team. Everybody has a different way of working. They have different needs. So if you shift the implementation to the employees, that means you are asking them to figure out the best way to integrate the change for themselves and develop their own success metrics. What does success look like? By when? And what are the signs that we have successfully implemented this change? How will our work look in 3 months or 6 months? That's all shifted to the employees, not to the top-down leadership saying, this is how success looks when you are doing this thing the new way. And the last pillar of Open source change is focusing more on talking than telling. So you're not just talking it's not a one-way conversation. You are having continuous conversation throughout the whole experience. You are embracing and addressing resistance. I cannot say that enough. You will have resistance. You must address it. If you don't address it, it becomes bottled up. It's like shaking a can of soda and then opening it up everywhere on everyone. And the guts of that resistance just spills out in ways you can't even imagine. You will have some negative emotions, but you have to find ways to create peer-to-peer interactions, two-way conversations between leadership and the people who are on the receiving end of the change, building dialogue and giving them multiple spaces and places and times to dialogue with you. Because sometimes resistance isn't really the problem. Sometimes the resistance wouldn't be there if we simply heard the employees' voices, if we simply took the feedback into account. So open source change is different because it involves the people who are absorbing and integrating the change into their daily work. And it seems logical that you would ask people, hey, we want to change. It needs to be more efficient. We need to be more effective. We're going to be owned by a new organization. How do you see this as working for you? What are the pitfalls? What are the risks? What are the things we should be taking into account with you, marketing team, with you, HR team, so that we can be aware and kind of customize and tailor this so that it works for you ultimately, so that you can implement the change faster, and then we become better and faster and smarter even more quickly. I will say that there are, always risks and messiness when it comes to any change. Please expect that. Because if you think you will not have resistance, and if you think you will avoid resistance by shoving the change through from the top down, you're kidding yourself. Resistance is part of change. If there is no resistance, there is no change. You have to have pushback and friction, because that's what happens when people learn and grow. When you take something away and replace it with something new, that's friction. People will resist, expect it. But instead of avoiding it, go head on. Go into it, find out what's happening, find out if it's an individual or a team and what their needs are and what their concerns are. Sometimes people resist just because they don't have the information, or they aren't sure about what their new workday will look like, or they aren't sure that they have the skills to adapt to the change, or they're afraid of what they might lose. Like, well, is this going to change my title? Is this going to change my role? Will I lose some of my authority? Like, oftentimes it's not about the change itself. It's about what people fear that they might lose because of the change. So taking the time up front helps you speed up later. Slow down to go fast. And of course, there are organizations like me and my company that can help you through organizational change, because sometimes it takes an outside voice and an outside perspective to see things more objectively, and to create solutions that will work more effectively. When we are kind of in the jar and can't see our own label, it becomes really hard to be objective about what we need to do, because we're so in it. We're so like hyper focused on stuff. But when you bring somebody in, we can pull the camera lens back and take a look at what's really going on to create a plan based on the truth of things, and not just the stories that we're telling ourselves about who our company is and what our people want and what they will need. And, oh, we don't have any resistors. Everybody should be excited about this, when really you will have resistance. So that's all for now. Down and dirty, quick playbook on a different approach to managing and integrating change. I will be back in another 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Lots of love and big energy.